Hi you guys, welcome back for another episode of Breakthrough with your host, me, Tess Timmons. Tonight we are going to be talking about literature, about books. I'm so excited. These are some books that I'm currently teaching. A few of them I've taught for a while. These are young adult authors, so if you have a teenager in your life, or if you're like me, I like reading young adult books. I'm teaching them to students. But because I'm teaching them to students, I found some really beautiful literature. Maybe the plotline is a little bit more obvious if we're older, but it is really cool to see what the themes are and what our up-and-coming and new, fresh writers are talking about. I love teaching books when the author is alive. So my students have just finished author presentations. They research all the different authors that we are learning about, including their social media, because after they're done reading a book by an author of their choice, they email that author. It's so much better than taking like a test or a quiz, right? We're trying to infuse the joy of learning. And so why not read a book and then ask your favorite questions about it to the author? And why aren't we choosing authors that are alive currently and centering in on issues of our world today? No shade against the classics, but sometimes it's time to move on. Okay, the first book that I'm going to be talking about is My True Love Gave to Me. It's edited by Stephanie Perkins, and there are about 15 different authors in this book. This book is all about short stories. It was published in 2014, and Stephanie Perkins' story is called It's a Yuletide Miracle, Charlie Brown. That specific story I teach to my students, and then I always try to see if they are further engaged and want to read this book on their own. So my main tool is to try to get students hooked into reading. Now, maybe you're not a teacher. This episode could still be for you. Maybe you have a young teenager in your life. Maybe you want to buy a book for your nephew, your neighbor, or maybe you're inspired to be a writer. Just because we're talking about young adult fiction right now doesn't mean that it doesn't apply to all writing. So I hope you stay tuned and like and subscribe, and I'll keep talking. Okay, so in this book, My True Love Gave to Me, it's definitely a play on words from a Christmas song. And because it's talking about true love, you've guessed it, there's a lot of short story love stories in here. What I think is really cool about this compilation is that every short story in this book stands on its own. So a student could read one story out of here, flip to page 50 and read a different one. And they don't have to feel the pressure of, I have to finish this entire novel. So I think that those are really good hook books because then a student isn't daunted by the amount of pages, right? Another thing that's cool about this is although the cover has to do with the play on words for a Christian Catholic holiday, Christmas, but there's not just Christmas stories in here. There are love stories that have to do with centering around the holiday of Hanukkah. There are love stories in here that for atheists. There are straight love stories. There are LGBTQ love stories. So I really appreciate that about recent authors. And I don't believe in book bans. I am strongly against it. Every voice should be heard because all of us deserve a seat at the table. So this is a great compilation of books. My students also, when they're researching Stephanie Perkins, they really enjoy that she has like different color hair. Sometimes it's pink, that they can find all of these different authors on Instagram. Like it makes it really hip and fresh for the students. No shade against Shakespeare, but the show must go on. Okay, the next two books are also short story compilations, but in a different way. First, they start out with Blackout, and then it moves into Whiteout. So these two books you don't have to read in that order, but they were written in that order. So we have about 6 or 7 authors that are combined in each of these books. Authors such as Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, shout out. What's cool about Blackout and Whiteout is that these authors have written these storylines together. So in chapter 1, Angie Thomas is talking about her 2 main characters, and then 3 chapters later, one of her main characters is there, perhaps interacting with another author's character. 5 chapters down the way, her 2 main characters appear again. So it's woven together. Now, these books you would actually read all the way through in order to get to the very end where a lot of things puzzle together. I'm trying really hard not to give it all away. Okay, a Blackout happens in New York City, and the power goes out. All of the power goes out, and all of these teenagers are in different places within Manhattan, within New York, and they're all trying to get home. So in Bed-Stuy and Brooklyn and Manhattan, and they've all got to figure it out because the subway isn't working, all the buildings don't have lights, the street lamps aren't working, and there's only so long that their cell phone is going to be of use because there's nowhere to charge it either. So, will they make it home? There's a bit of love in this one too. In this one, in Whiteout, it takes place in Georgia, and there is a huge snowstorm. And what I had to explain to my students is, in the South, they're not used to having all of that snow. So in fact, like 2 years ago, there was snow in LA and Santa Barbara in the state of California where I live, and there were all sorts of car accidents. Just a few years back from that, unfortunately, we did have tragedies in Texas with a freeze, and people almost died, right? So when your house is not created with that infrastructure, enough insulation, or people don't have cars that work in snow, or they don't have adequate clothing. I mean, maybe somebody in the South has hoodies, but they might not own sweaters, right? So how are they going to keep warm? So this is another story about different teenagers that are all around the state of Georgia. There's a snowstorm, and they're all trying to get home. A bit of love in this one, too. So our next story, I used this one as like a hook, and it works well as literary circles. This is by Jacqueline Woodson, and it's called Harbor Me. The students, when I teach them, we talk about how authors write what they know, and Jacqueline had moved up to New York, and in this picture far beyond them is the Statue of Liberty. So if we write what we know, usually we write about places of home. There are a group of students in this book, Harbor Me, and they are in a special class. In this class at school, once a week, the teacher actually leaves the room, and the students decide what topics they're going to cover, and no adult is in there. Oh, it reminisces back to the Breakfast Club. Don't you forget about me. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go rent that movie, okay? So within the conversations that they're talking about, they do have discussions about race. They have discussions about their families, about their emotions, and it's really cool to see what teenagers talk about when the adults aren't there to control it. Another shout out to Jacqueline Woodson. Last year in 2023, she was in Santa Cruz, and I was able to go up there. Another teacher introduced me to this author, and we went up and heard Jacqueline speak in Santa Cruz at a bookstore. She signed a copy of her then latest novel, Remember Us, that is historical fiction about New York firefighters, specifically Black firefighters, that were in danger because no one was really protecting them in at that time in the 60s and 70s in firehouses. So they formed their own Black firefighters, and they were going into buildings that had been set on fire by landlords who were purposely burning them down because they thought they were being devalued when Black Americans were moving into them. So she takes this sad but hard truth that we need to recognize, and she bridges within that a storyline of a young girl whose father is a firefighter. So another shout out to another book by Jacqueline Woodson, who, by the way, writes so many books, I can't even keep up. Okay, the next book that I'm introducing to you is called Miles Morales' Spider-Man. This book was taught to me by a fellow coworker, Andres, at John Gutierrez Middle School. Thank you, Andres. This book is written by Jason Reynolds. Jason Reynolds, if you don't know who he is, you're living under a rock, people. How do you not know? Jason Reynolds has been around for several years. One of the first books that Jason Reynolds wrote, Long Way Down, was one of the first books, along with Kwame Alexander. They were some of the first verse novels that were ever around. Long Way Down, Jason Reynolds wrote that book in order for it to be read in 45 minutes. I had to set a timer and push in order to make that happen, Jason. Whoop, that was hard. But I did make it happen, and I had several seniors who had never finished a book before in their life, and they read that book in 2 days. So it's a beautiful book, Long Way Down, that can help spark non-readers back into reading. Or, if they've always been a non-reader, into reading. And that, for me, an English teacher, someone who's worked in publishing, is a dream come true. So when we're looking at Miles Morales, it's also a movie. This book, at the start, Miles is already Spider-Man. I was a bit confused at the beginning to understand if he knew, if other people knew, but it starts out with him already being Spider-Man. If you have any students that are Puerto Rican, this is great for them as well to feel recognized with a main character. So yeah, a good read. Next one is one that I don't teach in Lit Circles. It's just one copy onto itself, but this one is courtesy of Cupid. And Nashe Jones has another book coming out this winter, 2025. So currently it's September. And it's only her second book that will be coming out in 2025. And I'm not sure if it bridges characters off of this or not, but this is her first ever book. This book is really fun. It's written, it really comes alive when you're reading it. It has a lot of character within the characters. She's got side notes in here. The chapters have really cute hints to them about the storyline and foreshadowing. When we read only the first 3.5 pages of this book out loud in my classroom, several students raised their hand and said, "Oh my gosh, I want to read more. Keep reading, keep reading." So I will read the first couple pages of this book out loud to you right now. It feels so good to be read to at any age. Okay, here we go. There are 2 things wrong with this world. Well, maybe not just 2. There are obviously a ton of things wrong with this world, but just for the purpose of time, I'll talk about the major 2 I've observed in life. The first one is lack of ambition. I know, it's weird for me, an almost 13-year-old, to talk about ambition, but it is kind of how the world goes round. Think about it. What if early Americans had never held that tea party? What if Marie Curie had decided she didn't want to study science? What if Beyonce was too shy to sing? Well, that would be a problem. A huge problem. And we're lacking ambition in the world today. Not just in the world, but specifically at Paxton Middle School, my school. Most people here are perfectly content to be ordinary, and that is a tragedy. Or is it a travesty? Oh, who knows? It's one of those words. Or maybe both, huh? I'll look that up later. But sadly, there is a lack of both ambition and talent in my school. Last year, my school got a project funded through a local car dealership that basically gave the students a budget to create something that would be beneficial to the school. All of the students had to submit ideas, and then we had to vote on the top 5. My idea, creating a dedicated space to host a tutoring center, would have obviously been super helpful for the school. But the rest of the students overwhelmingly voted to repurpose an old storage closet into a glorified nap room. Come on! I completely understand the need for rest and relaxation, but there's a time and a place for things like that. Like when you're at home, in your own room, on your own time. Imagine if Marie Curie had decided to focus on meditation rooms instead of discovering radiation treatment. The second thing that is wrong with the world is the concept of love. And I don't mean love like between family members or even love you have for your friends. I'm talking about romantic love, the type of love that you see in movies. Hearts, flowers, grand gestures, the whole shebang. The type of love is a parasite, especially for middle school. And oddly enough, all my classmates have been infected with the love parasite. It seems like every time I turn around, someone else is inevitably and completely consumed with what they believe is love. How many people do you know who actually fall in love in middle school? Love is nothing but a distraction from the important things in life. My best friend Bruno thinks it is highly ironic that I hate the idea of love since my mom writes romance novels. But I don't think so, because logically, tons of people have moms who are writers. Love hasn't done anyone any favors in life, and it definitely hasn't done me any. Love doesn't take away the pain of being roughly one of 15 black kids in your school, or of losing a grandma to colon cancer, or of never having a dad while growing up. Love doesn't help me forget, but ambition definitely does. Which brings me to my next point. I have big dreams and even bigger ambitions. When I get older, I'm going to be a biologist. I have everything all mapped out. Howard University for college, Johns Hopkins for grad school, cure colon cancer in my 20s, win the Nobel Prize à la Marie Curie, and when I'm an old woman like my mom, so about 35. It's a solid plan. A plan I will definitely achieve as long as I can overcome one obstacle. Well, not so much an obstacle as much as a person. Trevor Jin. Actually, I would like to revise my earlier statement. There are 3 things wrong in the world: lack of ambition, love, and Trevor Jin. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Well, there's so much more to this story, but I can't say it all. And Cupid is not just about love. There is a big wrench in that plan in here. It's such a surprise. But I think the way her words like flow and come to life, you're already able to learn that character right away. What I loved when I taught this to my 7th grade class, within the first 3 pages, we already had over 15 words that we had to look up. We researched and figured out what is the difference between a tragedy and a travesty. And also just the amount of knowledge, looking up who Marie Curie actually is and understanding what ambition is. There are so many beautiful discussions you can have with just the first 3 pages of that book. What a hook. Okay, the next book won a huge award. A shout out to National Book Awards. They email me all the time. If you are a teacher, get on it. If you're not a teacher and you love books, check it out. If you are a writer, research. National Book Awards. Okay, so this book is written by Dan Santa, A First Time for Everything. This book is a graphic novel. Graphic novels are so beautiful. They are not only for our struggling readers, but they are also a break. You could have a student who's reading at grade level, and then they get to bend back and enjoy something like this. I loved reading novels, and then I'd also take a break and read a magazine when I was in high school and middle school. So comic books and graphic novels are not just for kids. This is a beautiful book for adults as well. And also, I think this is a great way to talk about, with the youth, about jobs such as being an illustrator and how many different jobs there are. I mean, look at this cover art alone. So illustrations go all over the place, even bending into video games, right? What's cool about this book is that Dan Santat, sorry, I think I said that wrong. Dan is writing about his own life. There are pictures in the back of Dan actually on this trip. So Dan is talking about the first time he went away overseas on vacation, and he went with classmates and not with his parents. He was still in school. I think that is so brave and so needed with the American youth. And so this book talks about his positive experiences traveling and the hardships of traveling. I really appreciated that he shows both sides of the coin in this book. So that was really a joy to read. I am not finished with this book, but I will just say that I read all of these in the month of June, and these I read in June again. So I love to show my students that if you want to become a powerhouse reader, check it. I could read all of these in 1 month. And I'll show you a tip about that in my next podcast about how to help students break down an entire novel so it doesn't feel overwhelming. So this book is called Gigi, Shin is Not a Nerd, and I'm only halfway through it. I was reading it this summer on the beach, and then I had to start teaching. But so far it's very lively. She is trying to win a competition for an art school, an artist in residency program for youth. And the way that her and her friends have decided to enter this contest, because it costs money and their families can't afford to spend all of that money for this retreat. So she's got to figure out a way that she can help pay for it. I love how in this book our author Lee is trying to have the main character very solution oriented, and that she's already talking about how this main character in middle school is starting her own company, right? And raising her own funding. So I think that's a beautiful thing to show middle schoolers because and young teenagers. Because again, when I think back to my own story, at age 12, I was babysitting and marketing myself and making a killing. At 16, I was a waitress. 18, I was a bartender. By the time I graduated high school, I had $5,000 saved in my bank account. I was buying my own clothes. I was paying for gas in my car. Any entertainment I was paying for myself. And so I think it's a great inspiration for students to see that you can start your own companies and start generating income at a young age. So very inspiring. I'm excited to see if she makes it to the Artist in Residency program. Okay, thank you for listening so much. I hope you check out these books and keep reading. Even as an adult, it is really fun to bend back to a young adult book and find something that's lighthearted, something that's a little bit obvious but fun to read. And you never know. You could talk to your neighbor. You could talk to your nephew. Really, it's really important that we get our youth reading, and that we not only tell them to go read, but that we are also reading with them. Keep the love of reading alive. Thank you. Have a good night.